Western horses and riders have gotten the sort of stigmatized stereotype of being sloppy, maybe sometimes too hard on their horses, expecting too much, maybe being harsh. And then on the flip side, we have the English horses, which the sort of stigma and stereotype about them is that they have poor ground manners and they can't stand tight and they're impatient and they're fussy and they're particular and they're, sensitive. And so we have these two different sort of stereotypes and dichotomies. Oh, hello again. Um, so today I just wanted to talk a little bit about this kind of endless feud between the English world and Western world and just how silly I think it is. And I'm going to give you some context for why. I'm going to tell you about my experience having worked and shown and ridden in both. And then I'm going to tell you what I think actually just works a lot better. And so let's start here. Um, so if you don't know me, I'm Ruby. I am a trainer and equine nutrition consultant and personal trainer, and I have a riding school and all these things. And I have an interesting background in this profession, but I think it's really actually not that unique among horse people. So I grew up when I was really young, just my friends had horses and their parents would just like throw us on the horses and take off into the hills and our ponies would just follow. And nobody cared if we had good form or if we were balanced or anything. Like nothing really mattered. We would just be like, kids riding in the hills. And I do think I learned a lot from that just about like confidence and balance and skill building and all these things that I think are really important. And I think just in this era where, and I'm a mom and I'm super protective of my kids, but this era where people are super protective of their children, good and bad and all that might mean to you, I think that that is something that kids just don't have as much opportunity to do anymore. Um, and I do think that there's some value in that. So anyway, that's how I started. And then when I was 9, I wanted just a little bit more horse time. I wanted more instruction. I hadn't had my own horse before. And so my parents, being not horse people, did the best they could do, and they looked up horseback riding lessons in the yellow pages, and they found someone that had space and they signed me up. And so that happened to be at a dressage barn. So that was a wild change of pace, as you can imagine. Then it was all about, on the lunge line, walk, trot, canter, heels down, all the balance exercises and learning about bending and being on the bit. And I started showing and ended up owning multiple horses there, having a bit of a show career. It was, it was a really interesting way to grow up. I learned a lot about biomechanics and about balance and about strength and horse care. And it was very like classical dressage. It was not a modern dressage approach. And so it was very like traditional and, rooted in the classics. And I think that is also super, super valuable for a young person to grow up with that kind of upbringing. And and then when I went to college, I decided to again change pace and I joined the reining team and I learned about reining. And then I ended up I worked for a cutting trainer and I kind of dabbled in some various Western sports. I did some trail shows and then I actually spent a little bit of time working with gaited horses. And so I kind of like bopped around for a little while. And then I really got into kind of what we would call like problem horses and like fixing behavioral problems kind of on accident. At first, it was there was a man that just needed help. He had 3 horses that were basically feral living in his backyard. They hadn't been touched in years. And he just decided that it was time for them to have veterinary care and hooves trimmed. And I commend that decision wholly. But it was quite a job to get these horses to be haltered and to stand for the vet and the farrier. And I was determined to do it without drugs. And so it was quite a process. It took months and months of very consistent, careful work to get these horses to that point. And we did. We got them their care that they needed. And then that kind of became my thing for a little while. I worked with horses that had either specific or non-specific behavioral issues. And I would go to people's houses and train their horses and work with them and teach them and learned a lot about horse training and continued to take lessons in clinic and all those things. And then one day, kind of out of the blue, I happened upon these school horses and I decided to start a riding school. And so, and that has just kind of evolved and grown over the last few years to where it is now. Um, And so in that sense, I have a lot of different experience in a lot of different horse worlds. So I do have experience. I have started and restarted horses in both a very Western tradition as well as in the very English tradition. I have also, I took a pretty good journey down the natural horsemanship path. I had one horse at one point that I just couldn't seem to get through to. And so I went way deep into clicker training and positive reinforcement and had a lot of success with that. And so now my kind of approach and like ideology around horse training and horsemanship has all of these many tentacles in many different places and realms, and I just think that there's such value from that, from being able to experience all of it. And I counter that with people that have like expertise, experience, like expert level experience in one particular discipline. And I do think that is also super valuable, but I also think it's sort of like you're missing half the picture. Um, it's kind of like somebody who maybe drives race cars but has never actually driven like beater stick shift that stalls every time you stop at the stoplight, and like they're trying to give you advice about those more problematic cars, right? And so I remember one time having a conversation with a friend who was very well meaning and only had experience in dressage and some eventing when she was much younger, but she was kind of trying to give me advice about a horse that I was working with that had really severe trauma. And I was just like, all due respect, I totally get it. That approach would absolutely work with a horse that has never had a bad day in his life. But this horse has had a lot of bad days, and he is convinced that I'm here to be the enforcer and at all costs, even if, it's at a cost of at the expense of his own safety. And I need to prove him otherwise. And so that approach is just not going to work here. And so I just think, um, depending on what it is that you're looking at, I think there is value in both the English and Western traditions. And also in this more modern sense, like I think we're learning so much right now about horse brains and how they work. And if you haven't read Horse Brain, Human Brain, I think you absolutely should. Also, Evidence-Based Horsemanship is a really good read. Both of those, I think, really opened my eyes to how the horse's brain actually works and what kind of like the old school cowboys knew and also what the classical dressage trainers knew that maybe kind of got lost in translation along the way, and how we can really work with these horses. So all that to say, this behind me is Tegan. He is one of our school horses that we are very lucky to have in our program. We lease him, and he has had a full career as like a real working Western horse. So he is kind of my like exemplary kind of cow horse, stock horse, trail horse, pack horse. Like he's done it all, and he'll let anybody ride him. He's incredibly tolerant. He's a really good boy, and he has an incredible work ethic. He wants to work every single day. He's never said no. So this horse is my like Western horse that was done right. I also have a couple of English horses in my program that we're super lucky to have that were also done right. They, again, great work ethic. They're super experienced. They're very forgiving. If, we have someone do their first jump on them and they forget to keep their leg on, the horse is going to keep going anyway. Like the horse knows the job and they're going to do it right and do it well. And so we're really lucky to have a few of these horses. But I think that this has really illuminated for me and drawn out in my own experience what is so different between the Western and the English. And so let's talk about stereotypes for a minute. And just to remind you, I always have this caveat, there's more differentiation within the stereotype, within the category than there is between them. So there's more of a range of how people approach things in the Western world and as well as within the English world than there is between English and Western. I'm going to be using very broad strokes here to explain to you what I've seen from my own experience as well as from books and movie and media and all the things. But just know that I'm not talking about all of any particular type of trainer. So broad strokes, in the Western world, the horses are taught from a very young age. They are generally started at 2, and they're generally caught, halter trained, backed, bridled, saddled, and ridden out within a very short window. So it's a quick, like we take them from the pasture where they're happy living as a 2-year-old, and we quickly break them. And that means different things to different trainers, but generally get the horse to a place where they can be saddled, bridled, ridden, and then they're tied out for a long period of time to learn to stand and be patient. This was really important in like the context of working ranches, which is where the Western sports kind of have their roots, because these horses needed to be dependable. They needed to be able to stand there and you could go to lunch and come back and your horse would still be there. And these things were really important to have the skills of being able to stand and be patient and to tolerate a lot of things. These horses also often tend to be just like flooded and exposed to a lot. So they're hauled all over the place. They're tied at the horse show. They're expected to be able to tolerate kids and cows and balloons and whatever else might happen. Because again, in the context of like a working ranch horse, you need to know that your horse, no matter what you may encounter today out on, at work, that they're going to be steady and be able to handle that. And so um, that's kind of the approach generally to starting and training these young horses. And then by contrast, in the English world, these horses were more for battle. And so it was more about precision and training confidence and forward and technical things. And so these horses generally were started a little bit later. They're also generally larger breeds, and so they are growing and maturing for longer. And so generally, these horses are given until they're 3, and then there's a lot of groundwork and side reins and passoas and lunging and cavaletti and all of these kinds of things where we're building muscle and we're building strength and we're building precision and control and finesse and refining before a rider ever even gets on. And then eventually, when the horse is generally 4, late 3, early 4, a rider actually begins to ride the horse, and it's generally on a lunge line with a ground person, reinforcing what has already been taught from the ground with a person on top. And then eventually that ground person is taken away, and now the idea is that this horse has all of the skills that they need to be able to carry this rider and to be able to do so with finesse and precision and power and all of the things that they need to do their job. And so they come from really different perspectives, but what has resulted from this is that Western horses and riders have gotten the sort of stigmatized stereotype of being maybe sometimes sloppy, maybe sometimes too hard on their horses, expecting too much, maybe being harsh, maybe even by some standards, people might even go as far as to stay neglectful, leaving their horses tied out for long periods. Um, and I find that all of those things are actually incredibly rare in Western sport, but I do hear that stigma in the world. And so I think that is something just to put words to, that this is something people believe about some Western sports and trainers and riders. And then on the flip side, we have the English horses, which the sort of stigma and stereotype about them is that they're hot and that they're unpredictable and that they tend to be flighty and they tend to maybe have poor ground manners and they can't stand tied and they're impatient and they're fussy and they're particular and they're, sensitive. And so we have these two different sort of stereotypes and dichotomies. Well, from there, we have emerged natural horsemanship, which is sort of an offshoot more of Western, but I do see it used in English sports as well, where there is maybe more of the groundwork pulled from English training, but it looks very different than the English training. There aren't the side reins and the lunging and the cavaletti, but maybe you're doing more of like the, the stick and string and the disengaging the hindquarters and all of those kinds of things. And so that's kind of emerged. And then also maybe generally more from the English side, but also again, definitely has ties in the Western world as well. We have like the positive reinforcement and clicker training world where there's lots of liberty and it's a lot based on kind of building trust and building communication and using, consent and those kinds of things. And so I think all of these things have both pros and cons, but I think that altogether it's really interesting to kind of look at each of these different kind of like circles and areas of the horse world and see why they start their horses the way that they do and have kind of an understanding for why maybe also these stereotypes have evolved. So in my training and in my riding school, I like to pull from all of it. I'll very often have a group lesson where I'll have some people on English horses and some on Western, and we'll do groundwork and we also lunge, and we do like to start our riders off one-on-one in a round pen on a lunge line, very English style. But pretty quickly, we also like to be able to like send them off on hacks in small groups, and we expect them to be able to ride bareback, and we like to have play days and all of these sort of more things in the Western world. And so I find that it's really interesting to be able to continue to learn and to be open to the progress and the learnings and the tradition and the wisdom from all of the different sectors of the horse world, and to not close myself off and pigeonhole myself as one particular type of trainer. And so then therefore that's the only type of training I can use. And I also think that's why, like, in this information era with YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and all these things, we have access to people who train horses with wildly different perspectives and techniques and wisdom, right? Like if you think about even like just for fun today, I was watching other horse trainers on YouTube, and it was really interesting. Like I was specifically interested in how different trainers approach like the spooky horse, right? Or like the horse that's sort of reactive. And in the English world, it's a lot about like go forward and go shoulder fore and maybe do lots of circles and changes of direction. And it's a lot about like keeping the forward momentum and keeping your leg on, soft hands, giving forward, and sending the horse forward to move through the conflict and the stress while giving that horse direction and, sort of guiding that energy where you want it to go and channeling it into something productive. And in the Western world, it was a lot more about like kind of stop and back or stop and turn and like a little bit more of like a backwards thinking, but both were about taking this extra energy the horse has and putting it into something useful that also brings them back into the conversation with the rider. And so I just thought that was really interesting that they're both sort of getting at the same thing, but they had really different approaches. And I find I've worked with horses that need one or the other. But if you're pigeonholed and you've decided that this is the only way to do this because this is the sport that I'm in and this is what I've learned, when you are presented with a horse that needs something different, it can be detrimental to both the horse and to you as the trainer or rider. So, my encouragement to you today is to actually open up your kind of your realm, your horse world to something different than what you might have before. And all you might learn is that's really not for me, and that's totally okay. But I would encourage you to find out and to actually ask those questions and see what you can learn, because you may be surprised and you may learn some new tools that will just kind of help to bridge the gap between the two worlds and maybe also give you a little bit more empathy for the riders and trainers that are different from you, because ultimately we're all here for fun. We're all doing this because we love horses. And I think that's really, really important. And I think somewhere along the way, we've kind of lost sight of that. So, and I think Tegan also says he agrees, right? Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll see you next time and make sure to hug your horse for me. It's a good boy, Tegan.